Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to part 3 of the surprisingly epic Craftsman table build. In part 1, we found our stock, cross-cut it, ripped it, planed it up, and got ready for the joinery. In part 2, we joined the stretchers to the legs with the approachable but very attractive half-lap dovetail joint. Here, in part 3, all we need to do is make the top and assemble the whole table. The top is a perfect circle, and you might think we're going to need specialized tools for that, but you won't even need a coping saw. We're going to do the whole thing with inexpensive, common tools and approachable techniques. First, I'm going to plane that top blank, flat and smooth using my jack plane, and as I'm doing this, I'm pleased to see that that grain matching I did worked out pretty well. You can tell that this is multiple pieces of wood, but you have to look closely. It mostly looks like a single plank. Once the top is flat and smooth, I'm going to find center by just connecting 2 corners, and then using that center point, I'm going to scribe my circle using a compass. I'm using a nice old vintage one, but you can use a super cheap compass or even a piece of string. Drawing a circle is really quite easy. I'm going to do most of the waste removal on my saw bench just using a common crosscut saw. I'm going to cut off the 4 corners, then cut off the 16 corners that are left, and then keep cutting off corners until I've got something relatively round. You want to do as much work as you can possibly do with that crosscut saw. It's a coarse tool, removes material very quickly, and it's going to save you a lot of work later on. Is this the best way to do something like this? No, absolutely not. Bandsaw, jigsaw, or a turning saw would be way better. We've got several videos on how you can make your own turning saw out of junk and store-bought blades, and that would make this much, much quicker. Now, I got this technique from an old Paul Sellers video where he makes a milking stool, and he shows basically what I'm showing here. Definitely go check that video out. Also, Paul had a fall off his bike recently, and maybe there was foul play involved. It doesn't sound good, and apparently he's fairly injured. I'm not totally clear on what happened, but I do know that I really wish Paul a swift recovery, and everybody else in the community does too. Now, going along with what Paul showed in his video, next we're going to take all of those saw marks and we're going to work down closer to our line using a broad chisel. So I've got my work set up in the vise here, and the important thing is I'm going to use a wide chisel. I'm going to go bevel up. I'm going to ride the back of that chisel, and I need to move downhill. So you can see the grain right here. I need to travel across the grain in this direction, down until it turns into end grain down here, and then I need to flip or rotate it. I don't want to chisel ever in this direction. I'll split this seat straight in half. So I'm going to use a chisel and a mallet, and I can start up high, just like this. And I'm probably going to stay about 1/16 of an inch off my line, and once I have the whole thing rounded out to within about 1/16 of an inch, then we'll switch to an even finer tool. With the chisel, I got the seat mostly round, but now I want to work all the way down to my line and get rid of any tool marks. The spoke shave is a great tool for that, and I'm just going to use my shop-made spoke shave. This thing is actually 5 years old. I can't believe that, but it still works fine. It's going to let me come across the grain, same way as with the chisel, always going downhill. And this is oak, so it's pretty tough. But even when I'm going across end grain, skewing the cut is really helpful, and I can get some nice shavings. Now, the one thing you do have to worry about with this is keeping it square. Keeping it round is easy. Just work down until you get to the line and then stop. But you might get out of square. That's quite easy, so I'm just going to use this little square. You can use a big square, and just check it against the top. And I can see I need to remove a little bit more material towards the bottom here. But it was a tiny adjustment, so just those few strokes, perfect. And realistically, it's probably not going to be perfectly flat, so go for a kind of a crown shape where it's a little bit thicker in the middle and it feathers down towards the edges. That's easier, and it's going to look really nice. And especially when you're going over end grain, even the spoke shave might leave a couple of tool marks or not give you the surface that you want. So I'm finishing up with a coarse file and a little bit of sandpaper if I have any trouble spots. You really have to use whatever tools at your disposal. to get that clean, crisp edge you're looking for, this is going to be on display for a long time. I'm always sort of pleasantly surprised at just how round and nice you can get something working entirely by hand. This wasn't quick, but you can't argue with the results. Now I need to connect it to my framework, and the table's almost done. Now, on the original table, these legs were just screwed through into the top, and that makes a good connection for allowing expansion and contraction, but that original table is a little rickety because those screwed connections can just pivot. What I've done on this project is oversize the top by about 1 inch, and what we're going to do is cut notches into the top to receive the legs. So even when those screws loosen up a little bit, the legs will be locked inside those notches and the table won't be able to rock back and forth. That's still going to give us a lot of flexibility for the top to move with the seasons, but as I'm putting these components together, I need to pay a lot of attention to grain direction. If I put the top down this way with the grain running like this, all the expansion and contraction is going to be across the grain this way. And that's really important for the way we add the other components to the top. So if I put the legs on here, this is about the position that I want them to be in. And what you can notice here is that I'm not putting them this way, where these legs are going to expand and contract a lot, and I'm not going to put them, well, any other way is going to have the legs expanding and contracting a lot. By putting them halfway in between the end grain and the long grain, we're equalizing that expansion. Each leg is going to get the same amount of expansion and contraction, and things should stay looking nice and even. Now, it's also important to look at grain direction when we add this cleat right here. This thing isn't going to cup or bow on the long axis, so putting the cleat on this way wouldn't accomplish anything. The cleat has to go across the grain like this, and because I have to worry about expansion and contraction, I also can't glue this on. We're going to be attaching this using screws as well. And with the legs sitting on the top upside down, it's easy to transfer those leg locations with a pencil. And I've transferred those leg locations to the front of the top, and now I'm going to saw down the edges with a dovetail saw. So I'm going to do this flat on the bench top. There's no need to put it in a vise or anything, and having something underneath is going to support the waist and make it a lot less likely to chip out. I'm also going to chisel mostly from the top because this is the surface the viewer's actually going to see. If I have some breakout or raggedness underneath, it doesn't matter. No one's ever going to see that. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch butt chisel here. These short ones are easier to hold straight up and down. The bevel is going to be towards the outside of the piece. I'm going to hold it with my thumb and forefinger about halfway in the waist and strike it, not super hard. Same thing again. And you can see some of the waist came out, but it didn't break through to the other side, so I'm going to get a nice clean notch here. And a few more strikes to take me back to my baseline. And as I get closer to my baseline, I'm taking a smaller and smaller bite with the chisel each time. So now I've got about 1/8 inch, and I'm going to take half of that. And now that I'm down to a 1/16 inch of waist, or maybe even less, now I'm going to let that chisel drop right into my knife line, and that's going to give me a super clean shoulder. Then let's flip over and see what we got on the far side. So you can see the waist didn't chip through, just a little bit here, but especially on my baseline, it didn't come out because it was supported by the table. Now I can come in from the other side and do the exact same thing. And now you can see I've got nice clean lines all around the edges of my joint, and I just have to trim out this waist in the middle here. And then to actually get the legs to fit into each of these slots is going to be a bunch of trimming that's going to be pretty boring. So we'll skip ahead a little. The cleat is attached to the top just using some screws. They're going to allow for seasonal movement, and I have the screws counterbored like this so the heads won't stick out. And of course, I also checked to make sure the screws aren't going to poke through the top, because that would be awful at this point in the build. Now the cleat needs to go across the grain because this is the direction of wood movement. And you might notice the underside of the top still has a bit of roughness that I didn't take off. I think that's completely fine. No one's ever going to see it. And this is a hand tool build and we're trying to be efficient. So I'm going to poke those screws through using the bench and line it up. Lining it up by eye is just fine, especially important to make sure it's centered. And then I'm going to hold it in place and give those screws a tap. And now I've got 3 nice deep marks that I can use for drilling. And my drill bit has the depth marked in tape, so I definitely won't drill through. And what's really convenient about this cleat is it gives me a beautiful way to hold the top. So now I can put it in the vise just like this. Little drawer liner to protect the underside. Now it's held in a way that's not going to hurt the edges and leaves the top totally exposed. It's a perfect opportunity to give this top one more light scraping. It's going to fix a couple tiny bits of torn grain that I have and take off those last pencil marks. Now, getting the top onto the legs is actually a little bit tricky because the top isn't sitting on anything. It's just attached to the legs with screws, but you've got to get it in position before you can drill the screw holes. So I just used a combination square set to a 1/2 inch, and I used that to make sure the top was the same all around, and I put a level across it too, just to be sure. And then I used squeeze clamps underneath the top at each leg, and that just keeps it from sinking down while I'm working. Then I drilled through each leg with a clearance bit and into the top with a pilot bit, and I was ready to run in my screws. Funny story about screws, I thought I was going to walk into Home Depot this afternoon and get vintage style pan head slotted brass screws. And I was an idiot to think that because Home Depot doesn't care about furniture makers or woodworkers. They don't stock stuff like that. And all the screw choices would have been really bad on something like this. I'm not fussy, but this project requires screws that have a certain look. And what I was able to find was these really nice vintage style pan head slotted screws. They were just in one of my junk buckets. I keep a lot of spare hardware around, and I dug around for a while to find a matched set of 4, and they're not brass, which I really wanted, but they do have this nice sort of black oxide finish, which I think is going to look perfect. I could always replace them later. Now that I'm getting them in, I actually like the black look. It makes the piece look a bit more vintage. And the slot head is easy to put in. I want to align it up and down. One more turn to get rid of a bit of a gap there. Good. A funny thing happens with projects like this. At a certain moment, you look down and you realize you're done. This little table might be the perfect project for this channel. It's a real piece of furniture that you can build completely by hand using accessible, affordable hand tools. This thing ticks all the boxes. If you're an experienced builder, it's a quick, useful little piece of furniture, and if you're a beginner, it's a great little skill builder. If you'd like to build your own, we have a fantastic set of plans. Full color, super detailed in imperial and metric units, and always really affordable. And this week we're going to make things even better. When you buy the plans for the small craftsman table, we're going to throw in our shop-made spoke shave plans absolutely free. This is one of our most popular shop-made tools. It's usually $5, but we're going to give it to you for nothing when you buy the little craftsman table. If you'd like to check that out and all of our plans, go on over to rexkrueger.com/store and check out all the plans we have. There's dozens of them. Or you could become a patron and get all of those plans for free and a bunch of other stuff. And being a patron is a lot more than getting free stuff. You're also getting much richer experience with these builds. The patrons get longer, more detailed videos. This video you're watching right now, well, if you're a patron, this video is longer and has extra tips and tricks in it. I did a video in between these 2 videos, just updating the patrons on where I was and asking their opinion. I got some feedback that I could incorporate. And of course, they're going to get the plans for free at the end of the build, and they get a bunch of other stuff. Being a patron means being part of a community that can help you take your woodworking to the next level. If you'd like to check that out, go on over to patreon.com/rexkrueger and look at all the resources we have to help you along with your woodworking journey. Anyway, this has been a lot of fun. We hope to do more slow, live furniture builds like this one in a lot of detail. Let me know down in the comments what kind of furniture build you'd like to see. And thanks so much for watching.